The small town of Brookdale, Oregon, had always felt like a place where nothing truly bad could happen. It was surrounded by endless pine forests and rolling hills that turned gold every summer. Most people who lived there knew each other by name, and the biggest event of the year was always the high school prom. For the class of 2008, it wasn't just another dance. It was the night that symbolized freedom, the start of new lives beyond the quiet town that had raised them. That Friday evening, 5 friends gathered in a small suburban house on Maple Street. Ethan Cole, tall and quiet, was the type of person who preferred to listen rather than speak. His best friend Lucas was the opposite, charismatic, funny, always the one with the loudest laugh in the room. Mia, Ethan's girlfriend, had that soft kind of beauty that felt timeless, her calm energy grounding everyone around her. Chloe, her best friend, was full of life, always recording memories on her little camcorder, determined to make a short documentary of their last summer together. Ryan, the athlete of the group, brought the music, the drinks, and the energy that made any night unforgettable. That evening, everything seemed perfect. They were young, dressed up, and full of dreams. Their plans were simple: go to prom, dance until midnight, and then drive out to Lake Windermere, a hidden spot in the forest that only locals knew about. It was where every class before them had gone to celebrate the end of high school, a tradition of laughter, bonfires, and late-night swimming. Inside the car, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. The air smelled like perfume and gasoline, and pop music played through the cracked speakers of Ryan's old blue Chevy. Chloe filmed snippets of everyone: Ethan looking out the window, Mia fixing her lipstick, Lucas shouting lyrics into the night. The footage would later become infamous, replayed over and over on news channels, the last known recording of the 5 friends before everything went wrong. At the prom, lights flashed and the gymnasium pulsed with music. Teachers smiled proudly, parents took photos, and the group danced until their legs ached. For a while, nothing else mattered, not the uncertainty of the future, not the colleges they would soon attend, not the idea that this was their last night together. But somewhere around 11:30 p.m., the tone began to shift. Chloe mentioned that she had heard strange stories about Lake Windermere, about people who went missing there decades ago. Lucas laughed it off, saying every small town had ghost stories. Still, Mia seemed uneasy. She glanced at Ethan, asking if they really had to go that far out at night. Ethan reassured her it was fine. "It's just a lake," he said, "and besides, it's our last night together. We'll make it count." By midnight, they were back in the car, driving away from town. The road wound through thick forests, the radio crackling with static as they lost cell signal. Outside, the darkness grew heavier, the trees forming silhouettes against the dim moonlight. Chloe kept filming, catching moments of laughter, flashes of nervous smiles. No one knew that these would be the last images ever seen of 4 of them. Later, investigators would reconstruct the timeline down to the minute. They would see that the car crossed Route 9 at 12:14 a.m. and turned onto the gravel road leading to the lake. Witnesses would claim they saw headlights heading into the woods, but none ever saw them come out. Back in Brookdale, parents slept peacefully, unaware that their children were driving straight into something they would never return from. For Ethan, the one who would come back, that night would remain frozen in his memory. Every laugh, every word, every glance, tainted by what came next. Years later, he would still wake up in cold sweats, hearing the echo of laughter fading into the darkness of that forest. The small town of Brookdale would never be the same again. The night that was supposed to mark the beginning of their lives became the night everything ended. They thought they were heading for one last memory together. They had no idea it would become their last. By noon, the parking lot at the bridge was swarming with officers, parents, and volunteers. The Jeep was gone. There were tire tracks in the dirt near the water, but nothing else. No signs of a crash, no clothing, no personal items. The still surface of the lake glistened beneath the morning sun, mocking the growing panic in everyone's chest. For Sheriff Alan Brooks, this was the kind of case that clawed at the back of your mind. Gray Hollow wasn't a place where kids vanished. It was the kind of small American town where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest crime was a broken window at the diner or a stolen bike. But now, 5 teenagers, gone without a trace. The search stretched into the afternoon. Helicopters scanned the forest, divers combed the lake, families waited by the shore, clinging to hope that maybe, just maybe, their kids would come walking out of the woods, muddy and tired but alive. Then, as the sun began to dip, an officer's voice crackled over the radio. "Sheriff, we've got movement. Someone's coming out of the tree line." All eyes turned toward the forest. A single figure stumbled into view, disheveled, barefoot, covered in dirt. It was Jake Morgan. He looked pale, trembling, eyes wide and unfocused. When the deputies ran to him, he barely seemed to notice. His hands were shaking as he whispered the words that froze everyone around him. "They're gone. All of them. They didn't make it." He couldn't say much more that night. He was taken to the hospital, sedated after breaking down repeatedly. The others were nowhere to be found. No car, no bodies, no evidence. And yet, something in Jake's fragmented words unsettled even the most seasoned officers. The way he said, "They didn't make it," not, "They're dead." 15 years later, that distinction would come to mean everything. When Jake Morgan finally woke up in the hospital the next morning, his parents were sitting beside him, their faces pale with exhaustion. Sheriff Brooks stood near the door, notebook in hand, his expression tight and unreadable. Jake's eyes were swollen, his voice hoarse when he tried to speak. He asked one question before anyone else could say a word. "Did you find them?" The silence that followed told him everything. Over the next few hours, Jake tried to piece together what had happened that night. But his story, the only one anyone had, didn't make sense. He said they'd driven out to Lake Bridge like they'd planned. They parked near the water, turned up the radio, and talked about the future. Cassie wanted to study art in Chicago. Brandon was set to join the Marines. Lily was the quiet one, sitting on the hood of the Jeep, staring at the lake's reflection under the moonlight. Then, around 1:30 a.m., Jake claimed something strange happened. The radio started cutting out, static breaking through the music. The headlights flickered. The lake, calm moments before, began to ripple though there was no wind. He said he saw something, someone, standing at the edge of the trees, watching them. At first, he thought it was just a local, maybe some hiker or fisherman. But when the figure stepped closer, Jake swore its face looked wrong, pale, almost featureless. He told the sheriff that Brandon went to confront whoever it was, while the others shouted for him to stay in the car. Then Jake said the Jeep's engine died and everything went black. When he came to, the Jeep was half buried in mud. The air smelled like rain, though the sky was clear. The others were gone. He remembered hearing Cassie scream, then silence. He tried to find them, stumbling through the woods, calling their names until his voice broke. Eventually, he saw the distant glow of headlights from a search vehicle and followed it out. That was all he could remember. The sheriff listened, jotting notes, his brows furrowed. The details sounded like a ghost story told around a campfire, not the testimony of a traumatized teen. Still, Jake was shaking, pale, clearly terrified. His body showed scratches and bruises, but none consistent with a fight or fall. When officers went back to the area Jake described, they found only tire marks and a patch of disturbed earth, as if something had been dragged into the trees. But no car, no footprints, nothing. For the next several weeks, search efforts expanded in every direction. The lake was drained twice. Dozens of volunteers combed the forest, calling the missing teens' names. The media covered it non-stop. Prom night vanishing stuns, small town. But as the days turned to weeks, the hope began to fade. Jake's story never changed, though no one truly believed him. Some thought he was in shock, inventing details to fill memory gaps. Others whispered he'd done something to them, that he was hiding the truth. He never went back to school. He moved away within a year, leaving behind a town that looked at him with a mix of pity and suspicion. And for the next 15 years, Grey Hollow stayed haunted, not by ghosts, but by a question no one could answer. What really happened after prom night? By the end of that summer, Grey Hollow no longer felt like a small, friendly town. It felt cursed. The missing teens' faces stared down from posters on every lamppost and store window, their smiles frozen in time. Parents warned their kids not to go out after dark. The lake, once a favorite hangout, became a place people avoided, a place whispered about in the same tone as graveyards and haunted houses. Sheriff Brooks, stubborn and exhausted, refused to let the case go. He and his deputies spent weeks combing through the forest, interviewing everyone who'd been near the area that night. But the deeper they searched, the stranger it became. Jake's Jeep, the bright red one that should have been easy to spot, was nowhere to be found. No wreckage, no glass, no plates, nothing. It was as if it had never existed. One deputy, Officer Ruiz, reported finding tracks along the lake's muddy edge. They looked human, barefoot, but something was off about them. The stride was uneven, and the prints seemed to fade into the water, not out of it. Ruiz swore they hadn't been there the day before. By early July, the investigation started falling apart. Detectives argued over theories. Some believed the kids had run away, though no one could explain why they'd leave their wallets, phones, and graduation photos behind. Others thought Jake had simply lost his mind. But then things started disappearing from the evidence room. First, it was the cassette tape recovered from near the forest road, one of Jake's mixtapes labeled Prom 009. Then the notebook Sheriff Brooks had used during his first interview with Jake. Each time there was no sign of a break-in, just gone. Locals began to talk. They said the sheriff was cursed, that the kids weren't missing. They'd been taken. Meanwhile, Jake himself was unraveling. Witnesses reported seeing him wandering the woods late at night, carrying a flashlight and muttering to himself. Once, a neighbor called the police after hearing him scream, "They're still out there," from the edge of the lake. By August, he was a shadow of the boy he'd once been, pale, thin, his eyes hollow. He told anyone who would listen that he could hear them when it rained, that sometimes, standing by the water, he heard Cassie's voice whispering his name. "They never left," he said to the sheriff one evening, drenched from the storm. "You just don't want to believe it." Brooks didn't respond. He just looked at Jake, then at the lake behind him, its surface eerily still, reflecting nothing but the gray sky. And then came the night of the storm. Lightning tore through the horizon, the wind howled through the trees, and in the chaos of rain and thunder, the sheriff got a call. A hiker had found something strange near the lake's northern ridge. By the time the deputies arrived, the rain had washed away most of the evidence. But there, half buried in the mud, they found a single shoe. It was white, scuffed, and soaked, but inside, faintly visible through the grime, was a name written in marker: Lily. It was the first physical trace of any of them since that night. The next morning, Jake vanished again. When officers searched his house, they found muddy footprints leading from his back door to the woods, the same kind of prints Officer Ruiz had described weeks earlier. Jake Morgan was never seen again. And from that moment on, people in Grey Hollow began to say the lake had claimed what it was owed. The morning after Jake disappeared was silent, too silent for Grey Hollow. The air felt heavier than usual, the mist thicker, clinging to the treetops like a shroud. Sheriff Brooks stood beside the lake, staring at the muddy shoreline where Jake's last footprints had dissolved into the water. It was as if the lake had swallowed him whole. Search teams arrived within hours. Officers, volunteers, even some of the missing teens' parents gathered near the trail entrance, determined to bring Jake back. But as the day went on, it became clear that this search would be like all the others. Endless circles through fog and silence. The forest was dense, the kind that swallowed sound. Radios cut in and out. Dogs lost their scent. Every hour that passed made the sheriff's gut twist tighter. He knew this pattern. It had happened before. One of the search dogs eventually led them to an abandoned fire road about 2 miles north of the lake. There, hidden behind a curtain of vines, was something none of them expected. Tire tracks. 2 sets. One belonging to Jake's old Jeep, confirmed by the distinctive tread, and another, unknown. The tracks led deeper into the woods and ended abruptly at a drop-off near a ravine. Below, half buried under branches and dirt, they found the Jeep. It was upside down, rusted, and looked like it had been there for years. But that made no sense. Jake had been driving it just a few days earlier. Inside, the deputies found a backpack, a cracked phone, and a single Polaroid photo wedged in the visor. The picture showed 5 smiling teens, Jake, Cassie, Lily, Matt, and Emma, standing near the lake the night of prom. But someone had drawn a thick black circle around Jake's face and scribbled 3 words beneath it in shaky handwriting. He brought them back. That discovery changed everything. The media returned. Headlines screamed of curses, rituals, and cover-ups. "Prom night mystery deepens," read one. "The lake takes another," said another. Locals claimed the forest was haunted, that strange lights flickered over the water at night, and faint laughter echoed through the trees. Sheriff Brooks, though skeptical, couldn't deny that something about the case was wrong. Time didn't make sense anymore. The car, the tracks, even the evidence seemed to defy logic. It was like the forest itself was rewriting the story. Days turned into weeks. Rain hammered the small town, washing away hope and footprints alike. One by one, the volunteers stopped coming. The posters began to fade. By September, only a few people still searched: Brooks, Officer Ruiz, and the mothers of the missing teens. They followed rumors, false sightings, anything to keep the nightmare from feeling final. Then, one evening, Ruiz found something that froze them all. About half a mile from where the Jeep had been discovered, deep in the underbrush, lay a small bundle wrapped in plastic. Inside were 4 torn pieces of fabric, dresses, jackets, each belonging to one of the missing teens. And beneath them, written in red marker on a water-damaged piece of paper, "We followed the lights." No one could explain it. The handwriting didn't match Jake's. It didn't match any of the others either. The sheriff stared at the note until the rain blurred the ink. He folded it carefully, placed it in a bag, and whispered to himself, not for the first time, that maybe the truth wasn't meant to be found. That night, thunder rolled across Gray Hollow again, and though no one was there to see it, faint ripples spread across the still surface of the lake, as if something just beneath it had stirred. The case officially became one of the largest missing person investigations in Gray Hollow's history. The county sheriff's office called in state police, search and rescue units, even a team of forensic divers from another district. Helicopters circled above the forest for days, sweeping infrared cameras across the canopy, hoping to spot something: a body, a movement, a reflection. They found nothing. The Jeep was towed out from the ravine, and every inch of it was examined. No fingerprints except Jake's, no blood, no signs of a struggle. The phone that had been recovered was water-damaged beyond repair, and the SIM card was corroded. What little data could be extracted showed a single outgoing text sent at 2:11 a.m. the night he vanished. It was addressed to Cassie. "They're not who we thought." No one ever figured out what that meant. Detectives interviewed everyone: friends, parents, teachers, even the owner of the diner where the group had stopped before heading to the lake. Every story lined up the same way. The 5 friends left after midnight, laughing, happy, and very much alive. By dawn, only Jake's Jeep had returned, and even that didn't make sense. Weeks later, cadaver dogs hit on something near the lake's northern shore. The search team dug for hours until they unearthed a half-buried metal box. Inside were charred fragments of paper, a broken locket, and what looked like a student ID melted beyond recognition. It was impossible to tell whose it was. Reporters flooded the town again, feeding the media frenzy. Prom night curse, the vanishing 5, what happened at Gray Hollow Lake? The headlines screamed across every TV screen. Parents of the missing teens appeared on morning talk shows, pleading for answers. Jake's mother refused to believe her son was guilty of anything. She said over and over that he loved those kids like family, that he'd never hurt them. But as months turned to years, the case grew colder. Evidence was misplaced, leads went nowhere, and witnesses moved on. The investigation stalled under a growing pile of unanswered questions. In 2014, nearly 5 years after that night, a construction crew working on a new hiking trail made a chilling discovery: a shoe. It was buried under the roots of an old oak tree about 3 miles from the lake. Inside the sole was a scrap of faded blue fabric, later confirmed to match the dress Lily wore to prom. The find reignited the case. For a few weeks there was hope again. Teams returned to the site with ground-penetrating radar and drones. The radar picked up irregular shapes, depressions in the soil that looked disturbingly like shallow graves. But when they dug, they found nothing but empty earth. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the teens had joined a cult. Others whispered about a drifter who'd been living in the woods. There were even claims of a strange light seen hovering above the forest that night. Something bright, silent, and unnatural. The sheriff hated that theory the most, but privately he couldn't shake the feeling that it explained more than any of the reports on his desk. By 2020, most of the original investigators had retired or transferred. The files were boxed up and stored in a dusty evidence room, labeled simply Gray Hollow, Unresolved. But then, 15 years after the prom, a breakthrough arrived from the least expected source. A new detective named Alina Ward, who had just joined the Cold Case Division. She wasn't from Gray Hollow, didn't know the legends, and didn't believe in curses. She only knew that something in the old reports didn't add up. The timelines were inconsistent. The phone pings didn't match the supposed route. And there were 2 minutes of missing surveillance footage from the gas station the teens had stopped at that night, footage that had never been recovered. Alina decided to reopen the case. She didn't know it yet, but what she was about to uncover would not only explain what happened that night, it would reveal something no one in Gray Hollow was ever meant to find. Once the case went cold, Gray Hollow became a town suspended in its own fear. Parents didn't let their kids walk alone after dark, and every gathering at the lake carried an air of unease. The story of the prom night disappearance turned into local folklore, whispered in classrooms and diners alike. Theories emerged faster than investigators could track. Some claimed a supernatural presence haunted the woods, a shadowy figure that only came out at night, taking those who dared to wander too far. They said the lake itself had a hidden depth, a sort of portal, and anyone who fell in after midnight would vanish forever. Campfire stories grew increasingly elaborate, fueled by the discovery of the shoe years later. Others insisted on human explanations. A drifter had been seen near the lake that night. Some whispered about a violent local, long suspected but never charged. A few conspiracy theorists went even further, claiming the teens had been kidnapped for a sinister ritual or joined a secretive cult operating on the outskirts of the town. Jake, the sole survivor, became both a figure of suspicion and a cautionary tale. Even years later, teenagers dared each other to ask him about that night. His answers were vague, his expressions haunted. No one knew whether he was protecting the truth or protecting himself from the guilt he carried. The media amplified the legend. News outlets occasionally ran anniversary pieces, framing the story as a cautionary tale. Prom night horror in Grey Hollow, the teen vanishing mystery, 5 friends, 1 survivor, 0 answers. Social media groups emerged where enthusiasts debated every detail, every rumored clue, and every unexplained anomaly. The town itself seemed frozen in that night, caught between skepticism and fear. Some townspeople claimed to see strange lights over the lake, a dull, pulsating glow that appeared exactly where the jeep had been abandoned. Others reported hearing faint whispers in the woods, voices that didn't belong to any known person. Even law enforcement officers occasionally admitted privately that something about the case had always felt unnatural. But for every fantastical claim, there was a rational voice. Skeptics pointed out that teens often miscommunicate or take risks after high-energy events like prom. Accidents, dehydration, poor judgment. The explanations could be mundane. Yet these rational theories never aligned with the strange, fragmentary evidence. The burned ID, the shoe buried under an oak tree, the missing video footage. Despite all speculation, the town's collective unease never dissipated. Families moved in and out, new students arrived, but Grey Hollow carried the memory like a scar. The story became more than a tragedy. It became a cautionary legend. And somewhere, deep in the forest, the unanswered questions lingered. Shadows, whispers, and fragments of a night that refused to be explained waited patiently, as if the truth had been deliberately concealed. The prom night mystery remained, suspended between the real and the unreal, a story that would haunt the town long after everyone involved had aged, moved, or passed away. Even after 15 years, nobody could say with certainty what had truly happened that night until the breakthrough that Detective Alina Ward would uncover in the next chapter. 15 years had passed since that fateful prom night, and Grey Hollow had settled into a tense routine of whispers and unanswered questions. The lake remained undisturbed by authorities, the woods patrolled only occasionally, and Jake, the lone survivor, had moved away, keeping to himself and rarely speaking of what had happened. Most of the town had resigned to the notion that the 5 friends were lost forever, victims of some tragic accident or perhaps something far stranger. But then, one crisp autumn morning, a hiker stumbled upon an old hidden trail deep in the woods, a path that had been overgrown and invisible to most for years. Following it out of curiosity, he discovered a small camouflaged structure, a dilapidated cabin that appeared abandoned yet somehow preserved. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of mildew lingered. On a rickety table lay a collection of items that sent chills through anyone who saw them. A torn prom program, a scorched ID badge belonging to one of the missing friends, and scattered pages of a journal with cryptic handwriting. The discovery immediately reignited the investigation. Detectives rushed to the site, combing through every corner of the cabin and cataloging evidence. Among the findings were shoes, clothing fragments, and a series of strange symbols scratched into the wooden walls. Forensic teams noted the preservation was unusual. The items had been deliberately hidden yet untouched by time or animals. It was as if the cabin had been a secret holding place, a frozen moment in history awaiting discovery. Jake was brought in once the news broke. Initially, he was hesitant, overwhelmed by memories long buried. Seeing the cabin and the recovered belongings stirred emotions he hadn't faced in over a decade. Guilt, fear, and an uneasy sense of relief. Investigators pressed him gently, asking questions about the location, the friends, and what had happened after they left the prom celebration. His recollections were fragmented, a mixture of clarity and gaps, but certain details aligned perfectly with the physical evidence. Forensic analysis revealed traces of another presence, not the missing teens, but someone else, a figure who had interacted with the items, leaving fingerprints and hair samples that didn't match any of the victims. It suggested that the group had indeed encountered another person that night, someone who had intentionally concealed the teens or led them to the cabin. The breakthrough ignited renewed media attention. Reporters flocked to Gray Hollow, broadcasting updates on television and social media. Headlines read, "Prom Night Mystery Reopened, New Evidence Emerges. 15 years later, Missing Teens Case Moves Forward," and "Cabin Discovery Offers Hope for Answers." Townspeople were awash in conflicting emotions, fear, curiosity, and an uneasy excitement. Yet the atmosphere was tense. The cabin held more questions than answers. Why had it remained hidden for so long? Who had placed the items there and why? How had one teen survived while the others were lost? The breakthrough didn't close the case. It merely pulled the past back into sharp focus, forcing the town to confront the events of that night with fresh urgency. For Jake, the discovery was both a relief and a torment. Memories he had tried to suppress surged back, fleeting shadows in the trees, the screams and laughter mingling in confusion, the strange silhouette that had appeared near the lake. Each memory now had context, evidence backing it, yet the full truth still eluded him. As investigators expanded the search, tracing the cabin's history and cross-referencing the cryptic notes found inside, a chilling realization emerged. What happened that night was no accident, and someone or something had ensured that the events remained shrouded in secrecy. Until now. The breakthrough had cracked open the long-closed case, offering hope that the mystery of Gray Hollow's lost prom night friends could finally be understood. But even with evidence in hand, the night's darkest truths remained partially hidden, waiting for the final chapters to reveal the full story. With the cabin discovery fresh in their minds, investigators began painstakingly reconstructing the events of that fateful prom night. Every fragment of evidence, the scorched ID, the torn prom program, the strange symbols etched into the cabin walls, and the remnants of clothing, was meticulously analyzed. Forensic teams worked alongside Jake, who, despite his trauma, tried to recall the smallest details that could shed light on what had happened. The puzzle was complex. Witness statements from that night were scarce. No one had seen the group leave the prom in the critical moments before they vanished. Security footage from nearby streets showed only fleeting glimpses. Laughter, shadows stretching across sidewalks, a dark sedan parked at the edge of the lot. But nothing overtly suspicious. Yet the cabin items suggested they had been led somewhere, intentionally removed from public view. By comparing Jake's recollections with the evidence, a chilling timeline emerged. The group had left the prom together, laughing and excited, unaware that someone had been following them. As they reached a quiet section of Gray Hollow, the unseen figure had guided them toward the woods. The first signs of panic appeared when one friend noticed a light flickering in the trees, a signal they didn't understand, yet followed out of a mix of curiosity and misplaced trust. Inside the cabin, forensic teams uncovered more than just belongings. The walls told a story, scratched phrases, hastily written numbers, and a crude map of the surrounding forest. Analysts concluded that the cabin had been a temporary holding space, perhaps even a trap. Some pages hinted at prior knowledge of the teens' routines, suggesting the perpetrator had studied them, knowing exactly when they would leave the prom and which route they would take. Jake's account added haunting clarity. He remembered the laughter fading, shadows merging with the night, the sudden tension as one friend disappeared briefly behind a tree and returned disoriented. Panic spread quickly. Their escape attempts had been chaotic, the forest confusing and unfamiliar. In his memory, he saw glimpses of a figure standing silently, sometimes at the edge of the tree line, sometimes closer. Always watching, always unseen until it moved. The forensic team's discoveries were equally unsettling. They found traces of rope fibers, faint bloodstains, and scuffed soil outside the cabin, suggesting a struggle. Analysis of the fibers showed they did not belong to any of the missing teens, confirming the presence of another person that night. There were also small animal bones, indicating attempts to conceal evidence and mask scent, further hinting at a premeditated plan rather than a spontaneous crime. Piecing the events together, investigators created a night-by-night reconstruction. The teens had been lured into the woods, separated one by one, and in the chaos, only Jake had managed to escape. His survival had been a mix of instinct, luck, and the fact that he had taken a different path when fleeing, which kept him away from the worst of the violence. Local legends had previously dismissed the story as exaggeration, but the combination of Jake's testimony and physical evidence made the truth undeniable. The prom night disappearance was orchestrated, not a tragic accident. Someone had been lying in wait, patiently observing, ensuring that only one would return. Even with the timeline reconstructed, gaps remained. Who had orchestrated it, and why? How had they remained undetected for so long? The symbols in the cabin hinted at ritualistic or personal significance, but their meaning was still elusive. What became painfully clear, however, was that the night's events were neither random nor natural, a chilling truth that hung over Grey Hollow like a shadow, haunting the town as investigators prepared for the final phase of their inquiry. The night was no longer a blur. Piece by piece, the horrific reality came into focus. The group had walked into a trap, and the lone survivor carried the memory of what no one else could tell: the terror, confusion, and relentless presence of someone determined to make that prom night unforgettable in the most horrifying way. Months after the reconstruction of that prom night, the town of Grey Hollow remained tense. The investigation had reached its peak, combining Jake's testimony, forensic evidence, and newly uncovered leads. Authorities identified a suspect, a man who had moved away shortly after the disappearances, known locally as someone with an obsessive fascination with the high school students. His patterns and prior criminal behavior fit the night's events. He had studied the routines of the teens, known the timing of the prom, and had a secluded cabin prepared in advance. Confronted with the evidence, the suspect confessed in a controlled interrogation, though not everything. He admitted to luring the teens and restraining them, but claimed the events that led to the deaths of 3 friends had been unplanned. According to him, panic, fear, and the night itself spiraled beyond his control. Jake's account matched much of the timeline, confirming that one friend had indeed survived by accident rather than design. The authorities, combining confession and physical evidence, closed the case legally, but the emotional closure for the community remained tenuous. Funerals were held quietly, small memorials for the 3 lost lives. Jake, burdened with survivor's guilt, participated in interviews and counseling, becoming the reluctant voice of the tragedy. He spoke of friendship, trust, and the terrifying unpredictability of that night. The town, still wary, honored the lost teens with a permanent commemorative plaque near the high school, a symbol of memory, grief, and warning. Yet the emotional scars ran deeper. Parents, teachers, and classmates wrestled with anger, sorrow. Life moved on, but the shadow of that night lingered, a chilling reminder that sometimes, even in moments of joy, horrors can hide in plain sight. And though the case was closed in courts and records, the community understood that some wounds never fully heal, and some nights never truly end. The prom night lived on in memory, fear, and the unanswerable questions that would haunt Grey Hollow forever.